it inside the car like that. Remember, you've got your car together and you've got your tunnel in, you've got the engine in and everything like that. So we're coming now to fit this in the car. And we're going to get hold now of a thing that looks like a double-ended catapult. And this is the upper steering column support bracket. So that's pretty straightforward. And we need to form that now. And you will see that there are little nicks in it. And you need to bend this, put it in your vise and bend it so that these parts, these nicks, are at 45 degrees. So we put that on there like that, and we bend that at 45 degrees, and then we spin it round and we bend the other at 45 degrees. Just like that. Degrees, we're now going to turn it into a P-clip, or to be more precise, a balloon clip. So we're bending that around any of the 38mm tube like that. That's being bent around the tube like that. So it meets together like so. And what happens now, you need to drill this. Because what will happen, that this bracket will straddle like so, and the steering column will hang from it. So as we lift the steering column up into position, you can see that that will go there like that. Now, with the large wheel on, it does mean that you've got more chance of getting the wheel in the centre of the cockpit where you want it. So, depending on how you want to sit in the car or where you feel the wheel should be, if you put the seat in first and then put this in next, then the wheel can either go in the position like it's in now with this P-clip where it is, or you could reverse this P-clip round the other way and send the wheel off to a slightly different position. So that could go there like that. So for this exercise now, we're going to have the P-clip this way round. There's still adjustment on that bar, that way and that way. So at this stage now, we're going to fasten that like that. And we decided that to get the maximum room, we're going to mount the steering column as high as possible. So we're going to move into the end of that catapult, we're going to move that up as high as it'll go, like that. So we know now that that's the position we'd like it. So what's going to happen now, we're going to mark this with a marker through these holes, like that, and mark that like that, and mark that like that. And while we're at it, we could do with a couple more holes, one there and one there, so that we can put more bolts through there to pinch that together. So we take that off, like so, and now we're going to drill this and bolt it all up. Start off by putting these bolts in there. And now we're going to put the other bolts in. Now when you took this off down a vehicle, you will remember there's some really big washers that went through here, through these relatively large holes that gave you loads of adjustment. So it's a good idea to put those original big thick washers back on on these bolts that go through here. There is provision to put some little inside spaces in. For this exercise now, I'll just bolt this up so you can see the principle behind what we're doing. But yes, to use the original washers would be a good idea. So I'll put some big washers on there anyway. So that's hanging the steering column at this end. Now remember that regardless of which column switches you're going to use, you may at this stage want to put the cowl in. Put the cowl on the steering wheel so you know where you want, how far you want the steering wheel away from the dashboard. That's quite important. And you may also like to offer your dashboard up to give you some idea where it wants to be. So that's important, and obviously you still need to be sitting in the car and physically holding onto the wheel, possibly trying in the mounting wheel so that you know where you want it. It's quite important you get the wheel in the right place, because you can adjust it on this bracket. You can see there's endless amounts of movement there. Now, with that in position like that, I will just nip these bolts off a little bit because it will just make it a bit firmer and you'll be able to see exactly what we are doing. So, in the old days when you went for your MOT and you got the examiner used to get hold of this wheel and give it a good shaking. If it moved at all, then they used to want to fail it. But these days, these SVA examiners, they don't want to see the wheel fixed too firmly at this end, because obviously if you were involved in an accident, the wheel would move and you wouldn't get the wheel into your ribs. So although it doesn't seem to be particularly strong at this end, this is how they want to see it. So that's the wheel fixed that end. Now the other end, we come to the bush that we referred to earlier on, the steering column bush. That's the plain bush that you get. You do need to bend this. You need to put it in the vise and bend it at just under 90 degrees. So it's bent around about like that. And now imagine that you've got that brand new steering column plastic bush in there you've bought, and you've got the spring clip on the shaft. That goes on there like that, and then that sits on top of there and is eventually bolted onto there. So you can imagine that bush in there working quite well. Now it is important that that bush and that bracket is at exactly 90 degrees to the shaft. If it's not, then the thing won't work. So you need to bend that very, very carefully so that that face is dead on 90 degrees to the shaft, and also that it's at 90 degrees to the shaft in the other direction. So instead of it being square on, it needs to be at a slight angle to the car so that it's straight on with the shaft. Now, because of the actual position of the steering rack and the steering shaft onto in relationship to the car, the wheel isn't totally square onto the driver. Unfortunately, with using this big Sierra wheel, it will become more obvious that it isn't square on. It's something that you perhaps might feel isn't acceptable, but it is acceptable, and you soon get used to it. Obviously, once you've fitted our small mounting wheel, then the difference is negligible, you won't notice it at all. But that does go off at an angle, and it does need to go towards the offside of the car in order to clear the manifold pipe. But more important, it needs to clear the pedals, because with this new shaft that we now give you, then it does go, the whole lot goes on the outside of both the clutch and the brake pedal. So it goes on the right hand side of the brake pedal and in between the accelerator pedal. So that goes there. So the next thing we're doing now is moving on to the pedal assembly and the servo. Now, the pedals are used pretty much unmodified from the donor vehicle, and these are supplemented with the servo from the donor vehicle, and this is again supplemented with the servo mounting panel that you've got in the kit from us that is bent at a quite precise angle. I'll just get the servo mounting panel and show you that. That is a servo mounting panel in the exact form that you'll get it from us. That is the servo and master cylinder. Please excuse us if it looks a bit scruffy. That is as it's taken from the donor vehicle. You can see that we've even left the hydraulic pipes in so that the fluid won't run out, and we've crimped the end of them. It stops them up going in. Most important, on the end of this spindle out of the servo is this little polo. It's white, it's got a hole in it, it's plastic, and that is key. That goes on there, and in most cases there is a spire clip that goes on the end to hold it in. But that's important, you must have that polo. We come to the pedals themselves, which you'll all recognise you've taken out of your donor vehicle, and it's a good idea to renew the rubbers if they're worn. This is particularly worn rubber, and you recognise that as being the automatic clutch adjusting mechanism. Again, that's not something that's very expensive, and it would be a good idea to renew that. And refer to the Haynes manual for the adjustment of this. You do ratchet it up by clicking the pedal backward and forward, so look at your Haynes manual for that. Mopar do a system where you do away with this automatic adjuster, and they do a manual adjusting one that may suit some people. So we've got that, and again, when I'm looking at this assembly, I can see that there's a small crack appeared in it just there. And this is quite common. We've seen that in 2 or 3 pedals, and we've seen some that's already been welded. We've seen some that's broke off altogether. So just examine this frame for these pedals, and if there is a small crack in it, make sure you get it welded, whiz it round to your pal who's got a welding set, and you have to weld that crack. That's important. So basically, all that happens is that the servo fits through there like that, through the hole, and through those 2 holes. Dead easy. And then the pedal assembly then goes on there. Note there's 3 holes in there. We're only going to use 2. If you want, you can drill a 3rd hole in our servo mounting panel and countersink it from the front side and put a countersunk 10mm bolt through it. But I don't think that's altogether necessary. So we're now going to fit the pedals on, and you'll see that in the back of the pedal, the brake pedal, there is a small hole, an oblong hole, that accepts that pointed spindle that comes out of the servo. So that goes through the pedal like that, and then the 2 bolts, or the 2 studs out of the back of the servo go through the holes, and you'll see very conveniently that, and precisely, the tube that comes, that the clutch cable goes through, that passes through the hole in the top corner of the servo mounting panel. And all that's left is just to very carefully to put some washers on and to bolt on that panel, like that assembly. So they are 10mm bolts. This whole lot is bolted together quite firmly. One there, and then one more down there. You need a socket to do that. these pedals are on a common shaft, and there is that spring clip that holds them all together. If, when you've got the pedals in your car, you come to the conclusion that you'd like your pedals in a slightly different position, possibly you might want them closer together and further apart, or you just generally need more room, it is possible to take these apart, and there's nylon washers, there's nylon spacers in between the pedals. You can cut those spacers down and move them around and move the pedals on the shaft to give you a different configuration. But that's entirely up to you. I've always been happy with them as they are standard. So with that lot together now, we're going to sit this lot on top of that plate that's welded on the chassis. We're not yet bolting it in. We're leaving that like that, and we're going to push that to one side like that, and we're going to I'm going to put the pedals in. We've already established that the steering shaft goes to the right hand side of the pedals. So with that there like that, and you will need some help, another pair of hands. In this case I've got a pair of vice grips. We're going to mount that, and we're going to clamp that in position temporarily, like so. Now basically, with that clamped in position like that, you do need to do lots of tests now to make sure everything suits you and everything works. And the most important thing is that you do get the pedals to be able to be depressed fully for the brake and the clutch to work. And you do need the steering column to clear the brake pedal, etc., etc. You also need, at this stage, to try the bonnet on. Now that may be nearer or further away than what you thought, but you must try the bonnet on, because that reservoir there and that sensor, the low fluid sensor, must clear the bonnet. So at this stage it may be a good idea to move towards your bonnet and try that. Remember that it is possible to rotate these pedals in order to get them further away from you. So by simply packing this plate up, you can move that like that to get the pedals away from you, or you can tip it that way and lower the reservoir if it's close to the bonnet. But it's pretty definite that if you bolt them on standard like that, you will get a nice clearance from the bonnet from your reservoir. Remember, what you don't want to do with this reservoir, with anything else under the bonnet, is to shut the bonnet down and then look and see you've got a tit in your bonnet where you put a dent in your bonnet. Remember, with all these things, to get a small pyramid of plasticine and put on top of that, close the bonnet, and then you'll see how much the plasticine is squashed. You'll see what kind of room you've got. But at this early stage, you can spy up through the hole in your nose cone and you can see that. So that's important. You don't put any marks in your bonnet. So with that in position, you're looking now to make sure that the steering shaft clears the pedal. And you've got to make sure also that the pedals can be depressed enough. That won't press at all because we've got fluid clamped off. So that's got to press enough, and that's got to clear the actual bracket for the steering column bush, and then your clutch pedal has got to be able to go down, and that's got to clear this tube just here. And looking at this now, we do need to move the whole assembly over this way as much as it'll go. So we're looking to move this over this way as much as it'll possibly go, like that. And if necessary, you may need to trim a little bit off the servo mounting panel to give you more clearance. And that's looking not bad, although we can see, can we see just here, cameraman, that is touching on that tube. Now you can cheat a little bit by that U-shaped clutch pedal. you can get a hammer and you can tap that in, you can squash that in a little bit, and that'll give you more clearance. But obviously your clutch does have to work. So that is basically the pedals in position. We will look at a completed car later on, because you will see you'll need some further strengtheners that come backward off this to keep this rigid. At this stage, we've also got to remember that we shouldn't have yet put in the foot panel. This is a good time to put in the foot panel at the bottom, and particularly that little addition to the foot panel where we've got the bite out of it. We've got a separate panel with a hole in that the triangular steering shaft comes through. So that's a panel we can now fit. Now we're happy, we've got the pedals in the right position and everything's working okay, we can now fit that, that foot panel in. Don't worry if there is a gap there, you can't expect to get that fully closed. You can put a rubber washer through that eventually, but if there's a gap around your steering shaft, that's in order. We come now to the next stage of the steering assembly. And what I would say is one really important piece of advice to all kit car builders, and I can't emphasise this point enough, is that when you're building a kit car, whether it's a Robin Hood or a really expensive Cobra, or even perhaps Bron Champions build this car for £250 package, it is important that you don't fix anything permanently until you're 100% certain that you've got it in the right position, because there are lots and lots of factors could come into play later on in the build that will make you want to change things. So it's really important that you do everything semi-temporary, and instead of using gigantic nuts and bolts, perhaps use smaller ones, so that if necessary you can drill them out and put a bigger one in later. But whatever you do, don't go welding things at this stage. That's probably the biggest mistake that people make. So we come now to the next. When you are manipulating the pedals to get them to clear everything, as I said before, you may need to move the pedals on the main shaft. But the normal problem is that the pedal fouls on this tube that goes across the chassis. Now the pedals are pressed out pedal, and it's U shaped in section. If you, just as I've marked it just there, if you tap that in just there, squash that back, fold that back, then that'll give you more clearance. Obviously we've told you to fit the original wheel to your car for the SVA test, but once you've got it through the test, you'll obviously want to fit our mounting wheel. Now the horn ring from the back of the steering wheel will need to come out, and it's a twin rail ring, and it just presses into the steering wheel, so that just comes out, and that will need to go into the back of the mounting wheel. There is provision for it, but depending on which Ford Sierra wheel you've got, you may need to just re-drill the holes where the spring clips go into the wheel. But that's the kind of thing you've got to do yourself, and you've got to weigh it up exactly how you should do it so it makes contact. Because those two rails actually rub on the two pins that come out of the Ford Sierra steering column, which I'll cover in a few minutes. So we put that to one side, and we now come to the Mountney Boss. Now, I spoke to Mountney recently about this Boss, and to be honest with you, I can't get a lot of sense from them. But inside the box, it says it may be necessary to fit the enclosed washer between the Boss adapter and the steering wheel. And as you look into as you go into the box, you find a washer. It's a funny kind of washer. It's made of cardboard, and I can't work out what it does. So I'm advising you to chuck that away. Now the problem we've had with these Bosses is that once you've put the nut on the middle, then we have found in some cases that the actual inside of the Bosch has rubbed on the inside of the switches on the column. And when we've looked to examine to see why, we can see that the Mount Bosch isn't quite as well machined as the Ford Sierra Bosch behind there. And what we've had to do is, in order for it to clear, then we've had to get a mini grinder, and it's only a little bit. We've got a mini grinder with a 4-inch wheel in it, and we've just ground away the inside of that. We've only had to take a 16th off it all the way around, and we found that that then solves the problem of it fouling on the inside. So it's only a miniature amount, but we've tried it, and that does the trick. So that's something you may need to do. That is the ring I referred to earlier on. That ring goes in there and it snaps into the holes that's already there, but we found there's 2 or 3 different steering wheels from the Sierra, and you might have to re-drill those holes. You will also see that there is a little slot there that picks up the bush on the inside of the steering column from the Ford Sierra. It's important when you take it out of the car that you keep that column intact. Don't take it to bits, because there's lots of little bits and pieces in there you need to put back. So don't forget just to grind that off slightly, and you won't have it catching. The serratedness inside there is where the lock snaps in from your steering column, so that drops into those little slots just there. So that's that. Now, on the phone today, I've had a man tell me his Robin Hood has failed the SVA test, and it failed on the nuts on the steering wheel. He'd chosen to fit the mounted steering wheel, and we look at the pack of the nuts, and the mount is pretty good. They give you 2 lots of nuts in here, black ones and silver ones. They said it failed on those. And I said, well, it can't fail because they're rounded off, they're a nice mushroom dome on them, and there is there's a more than a 2.5 radius. And I'm told then that the SVA examiner, it was his first time this station had done a kit car, he said, failed it because of the sharp edges of that Phillips screw. Now this is really ridiculous. We really ought to do something about this man. But unfortunately, the person that phoned me wouldn't tell me his name, so I couldn't ring him up to give him any abuse. So if you want to be certain, fill that up with silicone sealer. We're now going to go on again with the steering column, and I want to cover the column switches. But first of all, I'm going to take the steering wheel off. With an ordinary screwdriver, get it well in past the first ridge and into the second ridge, and that will take out your horn complete, like that. That comes out complete. I just made the mistake, as you would all do, putting the screwdriver in there, but get it further in and take the horn button out in one go. So that comes out, pull out the 2 wires like that, and that's out. We then need to get a big socket on the middle, and we need to undo that. It's usually quite tight. If you do it in the car, it makes it easier. But no, that's come undone now. And then if you do it while you're in the car, you can get someone to sit in the car and pull it while you hit it from behind with preferably a heavy mallet. That's come off. Right, I didn't want that to do that, so we put that back on like that. And also there was a bush, that key bush. That went on next, and you'll see there was a little peg on the bush, and that peg does go around column, and when it turns, that peg locks into the slot, as you can see in the steering wheel just there. So that's important. If we look at it a little bit more closely, apart from that peg that sticks up on the front face, there's another peg on the side, and the peg on the side is a cancelling mechanism for the indicators. So don't lose this, and don't put this in backwards. So we've got the peg that locks into the steering wheel slot, and then we've got the cancelling apparatus just there. Right, that's that. We can also see that we've got the two prongs that pick up the horn push. They're just there, they're important. So what we're going to route of instruments, and that is the instruments from the donor vehicle. You'll recognise these. These, for this particular operation, we're going to put directly in front of you. So you're all familiar with the multi-plug on the back, the pushing speedometer, and the small printed circuit. Now, hopefully you checked that this was operational before you took your vehicle to bits. Obviously you don't want to put one in that's faulty. We're going to start off now by taking off the plastic curved fascia. There's 4 small screws to remove. Take those off. Don't throw them away, they might come in useful later on. There is actually 6 screws in this plastic fascia, not 4. All the screws off, that just lifts off. I don't think we need that, so we can put that to one side. Remember to keep your fingers off the matte black face and be very careful not to bend the needles. What we need to do now is to remove the hood from this, and we need to, from that corner in there, we need to cut it off with a hacksaw to leave around about a 1/4 inch all the way around. Now you'll do this on the dining room table, and all you'll use is a hacksaw blade, a normal, and basically we'll just get that and we'll start cutting from the side like that. And once you've cut through the corner and you've worked out that you're about the right distance from the side, then you can mark it precisely all the way around so that you can see exactly where you're cutting. Remember that you can, in actual fact, you can just sand it with sandpaper at the finish to make a really good job of it. We mark all the way around there like that so that we get it nice and straight. Holding it like that, we get the saw, teeth pointing forward, and we cut it off. It takes about 10 minutes to do. You'll see that the trip setter just pulls off. Put it somewhere safe. Okay, we're on the last legs now. You can see we've nearly got the shroud off. Now, it may be a good idea if you just lightly put some masking tape over the apertures of the 3 gauges to stop this plastic going inside the instrument. So that's what we discard. So if you haven't done that, then just tip it upside down and tap it gently. On the other hand, you could get your wife to hover over you with a vacuum cleaner, sucking it as you go along. So we've done this many times and we haven't found it detrimental for the little bit of plastic that's gone inside. So that's the part of the instrument that we want now, like that. Now, what happens now is this eventually goes behind the dashboard of your 2B, sandwiched with the perspex that you get in your kit, with a hole drilled in for the trip setter, and basically that's it. When you come to wire it up, it's dead easy. There's that one multi-plug connection, you just snap in the back and everything's wired up. So we're going to move on now to the car. The reason that I've done this now is I need to position this in the car so that we can get the steering column in position, because the steering column under normal circumstances fits up quite tight to the bottom of this instrument. So the top of it goes against the scuttle tube and the column goes underneath it. So we'll now go to the car and we'll temporarily mount it in position. I've decided to cut the two lugs off the top of the cluster. Cut, that'll do. An earlier dashboard or instrument cluster, we've taken the plastic clear perspex face off. We've then carefully cut off this fascia off the dashboard and taken it off like that, so it's separate. And then all that happens is you can see that that is red on that car there. We've covered it in red leather cloth, and then that's gone over the top of that to mask off the offending items on the dashboard, to expose what we want to see. And then that's simply, there's perspex now gone on top of that, and then that's gone on the top like that, and then that's been fed in from behind the dashboard. Right, with regards to the dashboard, as from today we've decided this is the dashboard that everybody gets, and it comes with these holes cut in the middle, and these holes will easily accept the Ford Sierra's instruments silhouetted behind the dash to give you the effect that we have on our own vehicle. So you don't need to cut them out now, that's it, that's how it is. So with that system that we showed you earlier on, or you'll see later, of us cutting back the original instruments and putting them behind the dash and putting them behind the perspex that we've given you, this is the dash that we'll use. And that makes it quite easy to fit because of the way we've done the chassis. So that basically goes there like that. This is fitted in conjunction with the bonnet. Make sure your bonnet's on first before you fit this, and then it's held in just with a minimum of self-tapping screws. It is made slightly oversized, so you may need to trim it to fit.